Burt Bacharach was a titan of songwriting, composing, and performing. The legendary musician died February 8, 2023, and left behind an incredible legacy of songs. His impact on the music industry was gigantic, and his creativity was revered by fans and fellow musicians the world over. In this video, we're taking a look at how he died, but more importantly, how he lived. Stay tuned as Facts First presents Burt Bacharach's cause of death officially revealed. Burt Bacharach's career began in the 1950s, and he managed to stay relevant for 6 more decades. His accomplishments as a songwriter and composer are vast, and they include 8 Grammys, 3 Oscars, 73 top 40 hits in the US, and 52 in the UK. He created hundreds of incredible pop songs and was able to collaborate with many of the top musicians around during each era in which he composed. And there were more than 1,000 artists who recorded his songs over the years. So even if he didn't work directly with them, he did indirectly. His influence on popular music can't be overstated. Bacharach's death. Sadly, Burt's time on Earth came to an end February 8, 2023. But his fans and family could take solace in the fact that not only did he live an incredibly long life, dying at age 94, but he also didn't have to endure a long and hard final few years. Instead, he died of natural causes. Of course, that silver lining doesn't make his death any less sad to the many people around the world who loved him and his work. Burt's career. It's nearly impossible to give a worthwhile summary of such a legend in a short video, so suffice it to say we won't try to dive into every aspect of his career. That's because it was long, fruitful, and influential. Bacharach is perhaps only rivaled by a handful of songwriters, names like McCartney, Lennon, and Carole King, in terms of his ability to craft so many catchy yet accessible songs. His songs ran the gamut of successes and not only won awards, but always had a ton of radio play and were used in countless films and TV shows. Some of the top hits from his catalog include I Say a Little Prayer, I'll Never Fall in Love Again, and Alfie. He wrote songs for some of the top artists of all time, including Dionne Warwick, Tom Jones, and Aretha Franklin, and giants like Elvis, Sinatra, and the Beatles all released cover versions of Burt Bacharach's songs. Even more modern artists like the White Stripes, Ashanti, and Twista included samples from his works in their tunes. His friend and collaborator Elvis Costello once remarked about the misconception that Burt wrote, quote, easy listening music. Elvis pointed out that for some reason Burt got painted with the easy listening label, but that while it might be, quote, agreeable to listen to these songs, there's nothing easy about them. Try playing them. Try singing them. Bacharach spread out his talent in many forms. He won 8 Grammys for his many hit songs, and he wrote music for Broadway shows, including his award-winning show Promises, Promises. And in 1970, he was handed 2 Oscars for his score of the classic western Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He and his ex-wife, Carole King, also won Oscars for the song Best That You Can Do for the movie Arthur. He also scored films like Casino Royale, Alfie, and What's New Pussycat. Burt was also a man about town of sorts. He was considered a ladies' man and was one of the first songwriters and composers to also be considered a bit of a heartthrob. And he was connected politically too. He was a frequent guest at the White House, regardless of which party was in office. And President Obama even awarded Burt the Gershwin Prize in 2012. Bacharach continued to work in his later years, scoring a movie called A Boy Called Poe at age 88 in 2016. And in 2020, he collaborated with Daniel Tashian, a songwriter and performer, on an EP. It was the first new material he'd released in 15 years, but it still managed to garner both artists Grammy nominations. Burt's rule about honesty. From 1982 to 91, Burt was married to fellow musician and songwriter Carole King. In 2016, Sager released a memoir called They're Playing Our Song. In it, she revealed some startling things about Burt. The first was that he became convinced that if he was dishonest, it would cause him to get sick. These thoughts began for him after discussions about honesty with his therapist. According to Sager, while the therapist might have simply been encouraging honesty and saying there can be sometimes negative physical symptoms that can arise if people are in a bad mental state, to Burt it meant something more literal, namely that if he lied to her, he'd get cancer. Burt seemed convinced of this notion, leading him to a bizarre confession near the end of their marriage. Sager wrote that one evening as they were getting ready for bed, Burt said he needed to reveal something to her so that he didn't get cancer, She was confused, and Burt told her it was something his therapist had told him about. And with that, he continued to reveal some harsh truths about his feelings on their relationship. He apparently told Carole that when she physically touched him, it made him feel nauseated. Carole was shocked to hear this. Burt continued that he often felt trapped when she was lying in bed next to him. Obviously, these statements hurt Carole's feelings tremendously. In the book, she wrote that after Burt said these things, he turned off the light and went to bed. And shortly after, they separated. Things really turned sour soon after when Burt continued his quest to be honest with her and admitted to being involved in an affair. He was apparently dating a 28-year-old. He was 63 at the time. Again, he suddenly felt that if he didn't tell Carole about the affair, he would get cancer. But what he got in the immediate was a dressing down and a Diet Coke thrown in his face. And shortly after, he got a divorce. Years after the divorce, Carole was able to look at the marriage with more perspective. She wrote that she then realized their marriage was perhaps more about music than love or romance. She claimed they didn't spend a lot of time being passionate or romantic with each other. Eventually, it felt more like a business partnership and a friendship. And she wrote that she was put off by Burt's love of watching adult movies, primarily because it made her worry that he was more connected to the women in the movies than to her. Dealing with his daughter's death. In 2013, Bacharach released an autobiography called Anyone Who Had a Heart, My Life in Music. In it, he talked about the incredibly sad story of his daughter and how it had a profound effect on him. His daughter Nikki tragically died in 2007 after taking her own life. But according to Burt, her troubles started long before that day. For starters, she was born premature at only 1 pound and 10 ounces, so she had to deal with the rigors of health complications that can come from that. But the bulk of Nikki's problems were emotional and psychological. Burt said they started when she was a child. He said that while she was never diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, he found out later on that her symptoms were very common among patients with Asperger syndrome. He talks about how she had an extreme sensitivity to sound, for example. She would complain that the helicopters outside or even leaf blowers were too loud, and that they made her want to kill herself. At that point, Burt hoped she was being hyperbolic, and that they just made her uncomfortable. But eventually her mental and psychological issues got the better of her, and she took her own life at age 40. Burt wrote that he always thought the strong relationship Nikki had with her mom, Angie Dickinson, would keep her from trying to hurt herself. And he admitted that it's possible they made major mistakes when raising her, but that they were doing their best throughout their childhood. Of particular note is the fact that he and Angie sent Nikki to a special school away from the family. He said Nikki was left feeling resentful about that decision and that it may have led to her pulling away from her parents more and more. Bacharach was haunted by her death until his recent passing, but he did manage to find solace in his music. He was able to compartmentalize as well, so he could continue writing amazing music without his daughter's death seeping into every aspect of his work. Still, he felt the pain of her passing every day. Now it's time to hear from you. What's your favorite song written by Burt Bacharach? Let us know in the comments section below.